My daughter-in-law sent me a text that said, "Too many people this year," and excluded me from Thanksgiving dinner. What she didn't know was that I owned half of the house she was hosting it in, and I'd been paying their mortgage for 8 years. 3 weeks later, she was frantically calling me, begging and crying because they were about to lose their home. But by then, it was too late. My name is Barbara Coleman. I'm 72 years old, and I live in Clearwater, Florida. For the past 8 years, I've been paying my son Michael's mortgage every single month. That's $2,500, month after month, because he couldn't afford the house payments on his own. I never missed a payment, never complained, never asked for anything in return except to be treated like family. But apparently being family wasn't enough to earn me a seat at their Thanksgiving table. When that text came in on a Tuesday afternoon in November, I was actually in my kitchen preparing side dishes to bring to their house. I'd made my famous sweet potato casserole, green bean almondine, and my grandmother's cornbread stuffing. I'd spent the whole morning cooking, excited to see my grandchildren and spend the holiday with my son. Too many people this year. That's all she wrote. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that I'd been coming to their house every Thanksgiving since they'd moved in. Just a casual dismissal, like I was some distant acquaintance they could simply uninvite. What my son Michael and his wife Jessica had completely forgotten was that when they bought that house 8 years ago, Michael's credit was terrible, and he couldn't qualify for the mortgage alone, so I didn't just co-sign for the loan. I became a co-owner. My name was right there on the deed, and I'd been making every single payment since day one. They were about to learn that when you exclude someone from your family dinner, you'd better make sure they don't own the house you're eating in. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories like mine. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this situation, because my story isn't unusual for women my age who tried to help their children succeed in life. I was a retired elementary school teacher, and after my husband Robert passed away 6 years ago, I used his life insurance money to help my family. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable, and I believed that's what you did for family. You sacrificed so they could have better opportunities. Michael was my only child, and when he married Jessica 8 years ago, I was thrilled. She seemed nice enough at the wedding, though I did notice she had very specific ideas about how things should be done. But I thought, well, every young woman wants to run her own household, and that's perfectly normal. The trouble started when they decided they wanted to buy a house in one of the nicer neighborhoods in Clearwater. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom home with a pool, perfect for the grandchildren I hoped they'd give me someday. The only problem was that Michael had made some financial mistakes in his 20s, and his credit score was too low to qualify for the mortgage they needed. That's when they came to me, looking so hopeful and young. Jessica was pregnant with their first child, my grandson Tyler, and they painted this picture of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, of me being the doting grandmother who'd always have a place at their table. "Mom," Michael said, "we need you to co-sign the mortgage. We can't get approved without your credit score and income, and with the baby coming, we really need this house." I should have just co-signed and left it at that, but Jessica looked so worried about their finances, and I could see the stress it was putting on my son, so I made what I thought was a generous offer. "I'll do better than co-sign," I told them. "I'll go on the deed as a co-owner and help with the payments until you get on your feet financially." They were so grateful. Jessica actually cried and hugged me, telling me I was the best mother-in-law any woman could ask for. Michael promised it would just be temporary, maybe a year or two until his business picked up and he got a promotion. That was 8 years ago. I never asked them to pay me back. When Michael's promotion didn't come through as quickly as expected, I just kept paying. When Jessica decided to stay home with the children, instead of going back to work, I just kept paying. When they needed new furniture, a new car, expensive preschool for the kids, I just kept writing that check every month. $2,500, month after month, for 96 months straight. That's $240,000 I've paid into that house, not counting the $20,000 I put down for the initial closing costs. But it wasn't really about the money. At least not at first. I was buying more than a house payment. I was buying my place in their family. I was ensuring that I'd always be welcome, always be needed, always be part of their lives and their children's lives. For years, it seemed to work. I'd come over for Sunday dinners, help with the kids, spend holidays there like I was truly part of their family unit. Tyler and Emma, my grandchildren, knew Grandma Barbara was always there for them. I'd pick them up from school sometimes, take them for ice cream, help with homework. Jessica would call me when she needed babysitting, when she wanted advice about the children, when she needed help with household emergencies. Michael would ask me to watch the kids when he and Jessica wanted date nights. I was useful. I was needed. And I thought I was loved. But slowly, things began to change. The gratitude faded. The phone calls became less frequent, unless they needed something. Sunday dinners became every other Sunday, then once a month, then just on special occasions. I started to feel like I was imposing when I called to check on the children. Jessica would sound annoyed when I offered to help with things around the house. Michael stopped asking my opinion about important decisions, even though I was the one making their lifestyle possible. Still, I kept paying that mortgage, because they were my family. And that's what you do for family. You don't keep score, you don't demand gratitude, you just love them and support them and hope they'll always want you around. I thought that as long as I was helpful, as long as I was contributing, I'd always have my place at their table. I was about to learn how wrong I was. The first sign that things were really changing came about 2 years ago, during Emma's 8th birthday party. I'd offered to help plan and pay for it, like I'd done for all the children's celebrations over the years. But when I arrived at the house that I was paying for, Jessica met me at the door with an odd expression. "Oh, Barbara," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We've already got everything handled. Maybe you could just watch from the kitchen? We have a lot of the other parents here, and I want to make sure everything looks perfect." Watch from the kitchen. In the house I was making the payments on. I spent my granddaughter's birthday party serving cake and washing dishes while Jessica played the perfect hostess to parents from Emma's private school. Parents who had no idea that the woman doing the cleanup was the one making their hostess's lifestyle possible. When I tried to join the group for the gift opening, Jessica quickly redirected me. "Barbara, could you help Tyler with his homework upstairs? He's having trouble with his math, and you know how good you are with that teacher stuff." Teacher stuff. As if my 30 years of education experience was just a little hobby. But I went upstairs with Tyler, because at least my grandson still seemed happy to see me. We worked on his multiplication tables while I listened to the laughter downstairs, wondering when I'd become the help instead of the family. The pattern continued and got worse. Family photos became immediate family only, which apparently didn't include the woman paying their mortgage. When they went on vacation to Disney World last spring, using the extra money they had because they didn't pay housing costs, they posted dozens of pictures on social media. Not one included me, even though I'd been the one who made the trip financially possible. Michael started avoiding my calls, and when I did reach him, he sounded distracted and eager to get off the phone. "Everything's fine, Mom. We're just really busy right now." Too busy for the woman who was gifting them $30,000 a year in free housing. The worst incident happened this past summer during Tyler's Little League championship game. I'd been coming to all his games, cheering him on, being the proud grandmother, but when I arrived at the field, I couldn't find Jessica and Michael in the stands. I finally spotted them on the other side of the bleachers, sitting with Jessica's parents and her sister's family. There was clearly room for me, but when I walked over to join them, Jessica looked annoyed. "Barbara, we're saving these seats for some of the other team parents," she said, even though I could see empty spots. "Maybe you could sit over there?" She pointed to a section where I'd be alone, far from my own grandson's cheering section. Jessica's mother, Carol, looked embarrassed. She'd always been kind to me, and I could tell she was uncomfortable with how her daughter was treating me. But Jessica was clearly in charge of the family social dynamics now. So I sat by myself, watching my grandson play baseball, while his parents sat with their real family and their real friends. When Tyler hit a home run and looked up into the stands, he waved at both sections, confused about why his family was split up. After the game, when Tyler ran over to hug me, Jessica quickly called him back. "Tyler, come on. We're going for ice cream with Grandma Carol and Grandpa Jim. Can Grandma Barbara come too?" Tyler asked innocently. Not today, sweetie. Maybe another time. Another time that never came. I drove home that day feeling smaller than I had in years. I was 72 years old, sitting alone at my grandson's baseball game, paying for a lifestyle that didn't include me anymore. But still, I wrote that check every month. Because despite everything, they were my family. Michael was my only child, and Tyler and Emma were my only grandchildren. I told myself that Jessica was just protective of her social image, that Michael was just busy with work stress, that things would get better. I told myself that if I stopped paying, I'd lose them completely, so I kept paying, hoping that my financial support would somehow earn me back the love and respect I'd lost. The final insult came just a month before that devastating Thanksgiving text. Jessica was having a dinner party for some of her friends from the neighborhood, and she asked me to help with the cooking. I was thrilled. Finally, I thought, she wants me involved in her social life. But when I arrived that evening, I realized my role wasn't as a co-hostess or even as a guest. I was the hired help. Barbara, could you stay in the kitchen and handle the dishes as they come in? Jessica asked. And maybe keep an eye on the appetizers? I want to focus on entertaining. I spent the entire evening in the kitchen of the house I was paying for, washing dishes and refilling serving trays, while Jessica entertained her friends in the living room I was financing. When one of her friends came into the kitchen to compliment the food, Jessica quickly explained, "Oh, that's Michael's mother. She loves to help out." Loves to help out. Not this is my mother-in-law who makes our life possible. Not even this is Barbara. She's family. Just the woman who loves to help out. At the end of the evening, Jessica handed me $20. For your help tonight, she said with a smile. You're so good at this kind of thing. $20. For making her dinner party possible in the house I was paying for. I took the money because I was too shocked to refuse it. But I went home that night feeling like I'd been slapped. I wasn't family anymore. I wasn't even a respected elder. I was domestic help who happened to share DNA with the homeowner. And yet, when the first of the month came around, I wrote that check again, because what choice did I have? If I stopped paying, they'd lose the house. Michael would struggle financially. The children would suffer. And I'd definitely lose any remaining place in their lives. So I kept paying for people who no longer wanted me around, hoping that somehow, some way, I could earn my way back into their hearts. I had no idea that the worst betrayal was still coming. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I was in my kitchen preparing for what I thought would be a wonderful family holiday. I'd gotten up early to start my traditional dishes, the ones the children always looked forward to. My sweet potato casserole with the marshmallow topping that Tyler loved, the green bean almondine that Emma always asked for seconds of, and my grandmother's cornbread stuffing recipe that had been in our family for 4 generations. I was humming while I worked, actually feeling optimistic for the first time in months. Maybe this holiday would be different. Maybe being around the extended family would remind Jessica and Michael how important I was to their lives. Maybe the children would ask me to tell stories about their grandfather Robert, or about the Thanksgivings I'd shared with their father when he was little. I'd even bought new outfits for Tyler and Emma, expensive clothes from the children's boutique at the mall. I'd wrapped them carefully and planned to give them to the children as early Thanksgiving presents when I arrived at their house. My phone was sitting on the counter next to me while I cooked, and when it buzzed with a text message, I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up, expecting it to be Jessica asking what time I'd be arriving or if I needed directions to bring anything else. The message was from Jessica, but it wasn't what I expected at all. Hi Barbara. We've decided to keep Thanksgiving small this year. Too many people. Hope you understand. I read it 3 times before the words actually sank in. Too many people. At the house I was paying for the holiday I'd been coming to since they moved in, after I'd spent the morning cooking their favorite dishes. I set the phone down with shaking hands and looked around my kitchen. The sweet potato casserole was cooling on the counter. The green beans were ready to be assembled. The cornbread was crumbling in my hands for the stuffing. I'd made enough food for 12 people, and now I was going to eat Thanksgiving dinner alone. But the shock of being excluded wasn't even the worst part. It was the casual way Jessica had done it. Hope you understand. As if excluding me was perfectly reasonable. As if I should be grateful for the heads up. As if 8 years of mortgage payments had bought me nothing but the privilege of being politely dismissed. I tried calling Michael, thinking surely this was some kind of mistake. Maybe Jessica had sent the message without talking to him. Maybe he didn't know I'd been uninvited from the family holiday. The phone went straight to voicemail. I waited an hour and tried again. Voicemail again. Finally, that evening, Michael called me back. I was so relieved to hear his voice. Michael, honey, I got the strangest message from Jessica about Thanksgiving. She said you're keeping it small this year. But surely she meant you're not having the extended family, right? Not that I'm not invited. There was a long pause. Too long. Mom, he said finally. And I could hear the discomfort in his voice. Jessica's parents are coming, and her sister's family, and some friends from the neighborhood. The house is going to be really crowded. But Michael, I've been coming to your house for Thanksgiving since you moved in. I've never missed one. And I'm already cooking. I know, Mom. But Jessica's really stressed about hosting everyone, and she thinks it would be easier with fewer people to manage. Fewer people to manage. I was being managed now, like a household problem to be solved. Michael, I pay the mortgage on that house. I've been paying it for 8 years. Doesn't that earn me a seat at the table? Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. Mom, that's not... You can't use that as leverage. We never asked you to pay the mortgage. That was your choice. My choice. As if he and Jessica hadn't come to me desperate for help. As if they hadn't painted pictures of family dinners and Sunday gatherings. As if I hadn't been making their comfortable lifestyle possible for nearly a decade. Michael, I didn't mean it as leverage. I just meant that I'm family. I should be included in family holidays. You are family, Mom. But Jessica's family is here, and it's complicated. Maybe we can do something the day after. Just the 4 of us. The day after. Like a consolation prize. Like I was being offered the leftovers of their holiday celebration. What about Tyler and Emma? Don't they expect me to be there? They'll understand. Kids are flexible. Kids are flexible. But apparently, 72-year-old mothers who'd sacrificed for their children weren't worth the same consideration as children. I hung up feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. This wasn't just about one dinner. This was about my place in their lives. My value to them. My future with my grandchildren. If I could be excluded from Thanksgiving so casually, what other family moments would I miss? Christmas? Birthdays? Graduations? But the absolute worst part came the next day. Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. I was at the grocery store picking up ingredients to make a smaller version of the holiday meal for myself, when I ran into Jessica's mother, Carol. She looked embarrassed to see me. And I immediately knew why. "Oh, Barbara," she said, her face flushing red. "I didn't expect to see you here. Aren't you cooking for tomorrow?" "Actually, no," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jessica told me. They're keeping it small this year." Carol's expression changed from embarrassment to confusion, then to something that looked like anger. "Small, Barbara? There are going to be 18 people there tomorrow. Jessica's been planning this for weeks. She rented extra tables and chairs. She hired a catering company to supplement the home cooking. 18 people. Extra tables and chairs. A catering company. But too many people to include the woman who was making it all financially possible. I think there might be some misunderstanding," I managed to say, though we both knew there wasn't. Carol reached out and touched my arm gently. "Barbara, I'm so sorry. I had no idea you weren't invited. If I'd known, I would have said something to Jessica. This isn't right." I appreciated her kindness. But it made everything worse. Even Jessica's own mother could see how wrong this was. But my son, the man I'd raised and sacrificed for, couldn't. That evening, I made the mistake of looking at Jessica's social media. She'd posted pictures of all the preparations for their intimate family gathering. Photos of the dining room table extended with extra leaves and set for 18 people. Pictures of the catered appetizers arranged on platters. A video tour of the house, decorated beautifully for the holiday, with Jessica narrating about how excited she was to host all the important people in our lives. All the important people. Apparently that didn't include the woman whose monthly payments made the house possible. But the post that broke my heart was a picture of Tyler and Emma helping in the kitchen, with the caption, "Teaching the kids that family traditions are the most important thing. So grateful for everyone who will be around our table tomorrow. Everyone who will be around our table. Everyone except Grandma Barbara." I sat in my living room that Wednesday night, looking at the beautiful table settings and the happy family preparations that I was paying for but not invited to enjoy, and I finally understood the truth. I wasn't family anymore. I was a monthly payment. I was a financial convenience. I was useful when they needed mortgage help or babysitting or cooking assistance, but I wasn't someone they actually wanted to spend time with. The hurt was so deep I could barely breathe. 8 years of monthly payments. $240,000. Countless hours of babysitting, cooking, helping, supporting. All of it had bought me nothing but the privilege of being politely excluded when it was convenient. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Robert died. I cried myself to sleep, not just from sadness but from a deep, bone-deep exhaustion of trying to buy love from people who didn't want to give it. But when I woke up Thursday morning, Thanksgiving Day, something had changed inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was joined by something else. Something that felt like clarity. If I wasn't family enough to be included in their celebrations, then maybe I shouldn't be family enough to pay for them either. It was time to make some phone calls of my own. That Thanksgiving morning, while Jessica was hosting her 18-person dinner party in the house I was paying for, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and started making a list of phone numbers. The first call was to my attorney Richard Martinez, who'd handled Robert's estate and had been my lawyer for over 15 years. I knew his office would be closed for the holiday, but Richard had always told me to call his cell phone if I ever had an emergency. "Barbara?" Richard answered on the second ring. "Is everything okay? You sound upset." "Richard, I need to ask you about the house I co-own with my son, the one where I've been paying the mortgage. What are my legal rights as a co-owner?" There was a pause. "Barbara, that's a loaded question. Are you and Michael having some kind of dispute?" I told him about the Thanksgiving exclusion, about the years of being treated like hired help while paying for their lifestyle, about the casual cruelty of being dismissed as too many people. Richard listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Barbara, I'm going to be very clear with you. As a 50% owner of that property, you have significant legal rights. You can demand a partition sale, which means the house would have to be sold, and you'd get your share of the proceeds. You can also stop making mortgage payments immediately, since you're not legally obligated to pay for property you co-own. But wouldn't that hurt their credit?" "Barbara, listen to me carefully. You've been paying the mortgage on a house you half-own for 8 years. You've essentially been paying rent to yourself while they live there for free. From a legal standpoint, they owe you nearly $200,000 in rent for living in your property." I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd been so focused on helping them that I'd never considered what my financial contribution actually meant in legal terms. What would happen if I stopped making the payments? If you stop and they can't make the payments themselves, the house goes into foreclosure. But here's what your son doesn't understand, Barbara. Because you're a co-owner, you could also choose to buy out his half of the property. If he can't afford the mortgage payments, he certainly can't afford to buy you out. So I could end up owning the entire house? You could. Or you could force them to sell and take your equity out. But Barbara, there's something else you need to know. Because you've been making all the payments while they've been living there rent-free, you could potentially claim that they owe you for their share of housing costs. In some states, co-owners who don't contribute to property expenses can be charged for their occupancy. I was quiet, processing this information. For 8 years, I'd thought I was helping my son build equity in his home. But legally, I'd been building equity in my own property while he lived there as essentially a non-paying tenant. "Richard, if I wanted to take action, what would be my first step?" "Stop making the mortgage payments immediately. Send a certified letter to Michael and Jessica explaining that, as a co-owner, you're no longer willing to subsidize their free housing. Give them 30 days to either buy out your share of the property or begin paying you rent for their occupancy. And if they can't do either, then you file for partition sale and the house gets sold. They'll get their 50% of whatever's left after the mortgage is paid off, minus what they potentially owe you for 8 years of free occupancy. After I hung up with Richard, I called my financial advisor, Helen Crawford. Helen had been managing my investments since Robert died, and she knew exactly what my financial situation was. Helen, I need to ask you something. How much money have I actually put into my son's house over the years? Oh, Barbara, let me pull up those records. You've been very consistent with those payments. I heard her typing on her computer. Okay. I'm looking at 8 years of mortgage payments at $2,500 per month. That's $240,000. Plus the initial down payment assistance of $20,000. So you've invested $260,000 total. And what's the house worth now? The last appraisal you showed me was $475,000. So your 50% ownership would be worth about $237,500. But Barbara, that doesn't account for the mortgage balance. What do they still owe on the house? I had to think about that. I think there's about $200,000 left on the mortgage. So the house has $275,000 in equity. Your half would be about $137,500. But here's the thing, Barbara. You've been paying down that mortgage for 8 years. Every payment you've made has increased the equity in that house. From an investment standpoint, you haven't just been helping them, you've been building your own wealth. But I've put in $260,000 and would only get back $137,000? If you sold today, yes. But Barbara, there's another way to look at this. If they can't buy you out and can't afford the mortgage payments, the house could go into foreclosure. In that case, you could potentially purchase the property at foreclosure for much less than market value. You'd end up owning the entire house. After those phone calls, I spent the rest of Thanksgiving Day reviewing all the paperwork I had stored in my filing cabinet. The original mortgage documents, the deed showing both my name and Michael's as co-owners, 8 years of canceled checks and bank statements, proving every payment I'd made. What I discovered shocked me. I wasn't just a generous mother who'd been helping her son. I was a property owner who'd been subsidizing someone else's free housing for nearly a decade. That evening, while Jessica was probably posting pictures of her perfect Thanksgiving dinner on social media, I drafted a letter to Michael and Jessica. Richard had told me to keep it formal and businesslike, to treat it as the legal document it was. The letter was simple. Dear Michael and Jessica, after careful consideration and consultation with my attorney, I am writing to inform you that I will no longer be making mortgage payments on the property located at their address. As a 50% co-owner of this property, I have been subsidizing your housing costs for 8 years. Effective immediately, you will be responsible for the full mortgage payment. Additionally, as my attorney has advised me, you have been living rent-free in a property I half own, and I am entitled to compensation for your occupancy. You have 2 options. Purchase my 50% ownership stake in the property for fair market value, $137,500 based on current appraisal. Begin paying me monthly rent for your occupancy of my property. You have 30 days to respond with your choice. If neither option is selected, I will be forced to file for partition sale, which means the property will be sold and we will split the proceeds according to our ownership percentages. Please understand that this decision comes after careful consideration of my financial situation and my need to protect my investment in the property. Sincerely, Barbara Coleman, co-owner, property address. I printed the letter, put it in an envelope, and drove to the post office to send it certified mail, even though it was Thanksgiving evening, and I had to drop it in the overnight slot. I wanted there to be no question that they'd received it. But I wasn't done. The next step was stopping the automatic mortgage payment that was scheduled to come out of my account in 5 days. Friday morning, I was at the bank when they opened. I spoke with my banker, Janet Williams, who'd been handling my accounts for years. Janet, I need to stop an automatic payment that's been coming out of my account for 8 years. Of course, Mrs. Coleman. Which payment? The mortgage payment for my son's house. $2,500 a month. Janet looked confused. I thought that was your son's mortgage. Don't you want to call him before we stop the payment? Janet, my name is on the deed of that house. I'm a co-owner. I've been paying the mortgage on my own property for 8 years while my son lives there rent-free. I'm done subsidizing his housing. Janet's eyes widened as she pulled up my account history. Mrs. Coleman, you've paid over $200,000 on this mortgage. Are you sure you want to stop the payments? This could affect the property. I'm very sure. And Janet, I want you to add a note to my account that under no circumstances should these mortgage payments be reinstated without my written authorization, even if my son calls and asks you to restart them. Of course. I'll take care of that right now. As Janet processed the stop payment order, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. For the first time since that cruel text message, I was the one making decisions about my own money and my own property. Mrs. Coleman, Janet said carefully. I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you planning to move into the house, since you're a co-owner? I hadn't thought about that possibility, but suddenly it seemed like the most reasonable thing in the world. You know what, Janet? That's not a bad idea. If I'm going to own property, maybe I should actually live in it. That afternoon, I called a locksmith. I need you to change the locks on a house I co-own, I told him. When can you come out? I can be there Monday morning, ma'am. But I'll need to see proof that you're authorized to change the locks. I'll have the deed and my driver's license ready for you. By Sunday evening, I had everything in place. The mortgage payments were stopped. The certified letter had been delivered. The locksmith was scheduled for Monday morning, and I'd started packing boxes in my apartment. If Michael and Jessica thought they could exclude me from their family while living in my house, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Monday morning, I was going to take possession of my own property, and if they wanted to stay, they could start paying me rent. After all, as my attorney had explained, I was the landlord. It was time I started acting like one. Monday morning arrived, and I was ready. I'd packed 2 suitcases and loaded them in my car, along with the deed to the house, my identification, and all the mortgage payment records. At exactly 10 o'clock I met the locksmith at the house that was half mine. Michael's car wasn't in the driveway. He was at work, probably having no idea that his comfortable world was about to change completely. Jessica's car was there, which meant she was home with the children. The locksmith, a kind man named Tom, who'd been changing locks in Clearwater for 20 years, looked at my deed carefully. Mrs. Coleman, this shows you're definitely a co-owner. But are you sure you want to do this? Sometimes family property disputes can get complicated. Tom, I've been paying the mortgage on this house for 8 years while being treated like a stranger. I'm not disputing anything. I'm taking possession of my own property. He nodded and got to work. While he changed the locks, I sat in my car and waited for what I knew was coming. At 10:47 a.m., Jessica came running out of the house in her pajamas and robe, looking panicked. Excuse me, she called to Tom. What are you doing? This is my house. Tom looked at me, and I got out of my car with the deed in my hand. Actually, Jessica, it's my house too. I'm a 50% owner, and I've decided to take possession of my property. Jessica's face went from confusion to anger in about 2 seconds. You can't do this. Michael will call the police. Please do have him call the police, I said calmly. I'd love for them to see the deed that shows I own half of this property and the bank records showing I've made every mortgage payment for 8 years. Jessica's face went pale. I don't think she'd ever actually seen the deed or realized that my name was on it. Where are we supposed to go? She asked, and for the first time in years, I heard real fear in her voice instead of entitlement. Well, you have 30 days to decide. You can buy out my half of the property for $137,500, or you can pay me rent to continue living here. The choice is yours. We don't have that kind of money. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before excluding me from Thanksgiving dinner in my own house. Tom finished changing the locks and handed me the new keys. All set, Mrs. Coleman. You've got the only copies. I thanked him and watched him drive away. Jessica was still standing in the driveway in her pajamas, looking stunned. Barbara, you can't be serious about this. What about the children? This is their home. Jessica, Tyler and Emma are my grandchildren, and I love them dearly. But they'll adapt to whatever housing situation you and Michael provide for them. Children are flexible. Remember, that's what Michael told me when you excluded me from Thanksgiving. I walked past her to the front door and used my new key to go inside. It felt strange, being in the house I'd been financing for so long, but approaching it as the owner rather than as an unwelcome guest. The house was beautiful. All the furniture and decorations that my mortgage payments had made possible were arranged perfectly. The kitchen where I'd been relegated to washing dishes was spotless and modern. The dining room where I'd been excluded from Thanksgiving dinner still had some of the holiday decorations up. I walked through the rooms slowly, really seeing them for the first time as my property. This wasn't Michael and Jessica's house that I'd been helping with. This was my house that they'd been living in rent-free while treating me terribly. Jessica followed me inside, wrapping her robe tighter around herself. Barbara, please. Let's talk about this. Maybe we can work something out. I'm listening. What if we included you in more family activities? What if you came for dinner once a week? I looked at her carefully. Jessica, you're offering to include me in my own house once a week. She realized how ridiculous that sounded. I mean, what if we made you feel more welcome? How much rent would you be willing to pay to live here? Rent? But we can't afford rent. We're barely making it as it is. You've been making it just fine for 8 years because I've been covering your biggest expense. Your mortgage payment is $2,500 a month. That's what you'd need to pay me in rent. $2,500? Barbara, Michael only makes $60,000 a year. We can't afford that. And there it was. The truth that Michael and Jessica had been avoiding for 8 years. They couldn't afford the house they were living in. They never could. Their entire lifestyle had been subsidized by the woman they'd been treating like hired help. Then you need to start looking for housing. You can actually afford, I said. My phone rang. It was Michael. And he sounded frantic. Mom, what the hell are you doing? Jessica said you changed the locks on our house. I changed the locks on my house, Michael. The house I co-own and have been paying for. You can't just kick us out. We have children. I'm not kicking anyone out. I sent you a certified letter explaining your options. You can buy out my ownership stake. Or you can pay me rent. Or we can sell the house and split the proceeds. Those are the same options any co-owner has. Mom, this is insane. We're family. Yes, we are family. But apparently I'm not family enough to be included in family gatherings. So I've decided to stop treating this as a family matter and start treating it as the business matter it actually is. We can't afford to buy you out, and we can't afford to pay you rent. Then I guess you need to start looking for a place you can afford. Michael, you have 29 days left to make your decision. Mom, please. Jessica's crying. The kids are scared. Can't we work this out? I looked at Jessica, who was indeed crying now, standing in the living room of the house she was about to lose. Michael, where was this concern for family when you excluded me from Thanksgiving? Where was this worry about working things out when your wife treated me like domestic help? Where was this care for my feelings when you told me I couldn't use my mortgage payments as leverage? That's different. No, Michael. It's exactly the same. You didn't want me as family when it was convenient for you. Now I'm treating this as the business arrangement. It apparently always was. I hung up and turned to Jessica, who was still crying. Jessica, I'm going to go pack some of my things and stay here tonight. I suggest you use the time to start looking at rental properties in your actual price range. What about the children's schools? Their friends? This is the only home they've ever known. Children adapt. They're flexible. Besides, maybe this will teach them an important lesson about treating family members with respect. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched Michael and Jessica scramble to find a solution they couldn't afford. Michael called me every few days, begging me to reconsider, offering to include me in more family activities, promising that things would be different. But it was too late for promises. I'd learned that my generosity had been seen as weakness, my love had been taken for granted, and my financial support had been expected rather than appreciated. The bank foreclosure notice arrived 18 days after I stopped making payments. Michael and Jessica had tried to make the payment themselves, but they could only come up with $800. The bank wanted the full $2,500, plus late fees. 2 days before the 30-day deadline in my letter, Michael called me one last time. "Mom, we found a 3-bedroom apartment we can afford. The rent is $1,200 a month. But we need to be out by Friday." That sounds like a much more reasonable housing situation for your income level. "Mom, I'm sorry. We're both sorry. We didn't realize how much we depended on you, and we should have treated you better." It was the first real apology I'd gotten, but it was 8 years too late. I appreciate the apology, Michael, but this isn't about revenge. This is about finally making smart financial decisions. You can't afford a house that costs $2,500 a month to maintain. You never could. What happens to the house now? I'm buying out your half through the foreclosure process. I'll own it completely. And then what? Then I'll have a beautiful house to live in during my retirement, without having to pay rent to anyone. The day they moved out, Tyler came up to me with tears in his eyes. "Grandma Barbara, why can't we live here anymore?" I knelt down to his level. "Because sometimes adults make decisions that have consequences, sweetheart. But you know what? You can still come visit me here anytime your parents allow it. This will always be a place where you're welcome." Emma hugged me tightly. "I'll miss living near you, Grandma. I'll miss having you nearby too, honey. But $1,200 a month is much easier for your parents to afford than $2,500. They'll be less stressed about money now." And that was true. Within a few months, I could see the difference in Michael and Jessica. Without the crushing financial pressure of a house they couldn't afford, they seemed happier, more relaxed. They'd moved to a modest apartment in a good school district, and they were finally living within their means. As for me, I was living in my beautiful house, the one I'd been paying for all along. I had a pool, a garden, and plenty of space for when Tyler and Emma came to visit on weekends. I'd also learned something important about myself. I didn't need to buy anyone's love. I didn't need to finance other people's dreams at the expense of my own dignity. And I certainly didn't need to pay for the privilege of being treated poorly by people who were supposed to care about me. The house is peaceful now. I have friends from my retirement community who come for dinner. Friends who appreciate my cooking and my company without me having to pay for the privilege of their friendship. And every month, when I don't have to write that $2,500 check, I remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling them to make financial decisions they can't afford. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is to stop paying for people who don't respect you. I'm 72 years old, and I finally learned how to say no. It took me 8 years and nearly $250,000 to learn that lesson. But it was worth every penny. Because now, when I sit at my own dining room table, every seat is filled with people who actually want me there. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever reached a point where you had to stop being generous to people who didn't appreciate you? Let me know in the comments. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine.